My name is Dalim, and I'm chairman of three great groups in the BCS, the Chartered Institute for IT. And they are London North, Central, and South. So we're trying to cover a whole snow zone here, if you will. And we've got lots and lots of great members, including hopefully yourself. If not, then please do join BCS and become part of our communities and enjoy the networking, the knowledge sharing, and the expertise that exists within this organization. Well, in terms of expertise, we have lots of it. I mean, I know because in the three groups I mentioned, the three London branches, there is an abundance of expertise. Some of it is represented in this room here, and probably online as well. The expertise covers all sorts of topics. So in the London branches, what we've done is benefited from it and passed it on for the benefit of our members. We look for people with initiative. And so we have things called initiatives, and the initiatives are then led by the committee members, our committee members who are interested in that particular topic. So we have an initiative for AI. We have an initiative for business and business analysis, business management, I want to call it. And that is led by my good friend, Dr. Kitty Hung, who is here in our audience live, as it were, this evening. In terms of the letters, C is for cyber and also for security. So we have an initiative on cyber and security. D is for data and is also for diversity and inclusion. You get the idea. We keep going through as much of the alphabet as we can with different initiatives. And what do we do with those? Well, we run events. Primarily, we run events, which are also occasions to network, get together, certainly to learn, benefit from others' expertise, link up with experts, such as the person I'm going to introduce you to in a minute, and generally help to make IT good for society. Making IT good for society is, of course, the BCS strapline, and that's something that I hope we do. In the London branches, we've done quite a lot of that. For example, we've benefited from our economy of scale, if you will, and last year, that's 2023, we ran events. We were limited by a certain factor, but we ran 44 events during the year. The constraint was, of course, that so as not to drop dead of fatigue or whatever, and because the year only contains 52 weeks, we thought 44 was enough. This year, I said, let's do less. So we're struggling to keep the number under 40, but I think we'll manage it. The initiatives we then group together and put them together in presentations, PDFs, which are then available, and go to encourage potential future speakers to come and talk to us on AI, for example, but a different aspect of AI. And likewise with cyber and all those other topics. Another one we've majored on, but I haven't mentioned, is E, which is for eco. There's also another one which I must mention. It's on the tip of my tongue. It's quantum. So these are very much issues, topics of today and tomorrow. And we are working our way through them, aiming to get great speakers, and we're aiming to get some great talks. We record them and we make them available to you and our other members in the BCS, the Chartered Institute for IT. Great. Well, that's my preamble. I have mentioned a number of initiatives which relate to this evening's talk. A for AI relates to this. D for data relates to this as well. And also D for diversity and inclusion. These all relate to this evening's event, to this evening's talk. So, who is the speaker? Well, surely you can see already that it is Jo Stansfield. Jo is a friend who I've known for a long time. She does great things in BCS, but oh, I'm jumping the gun. That's the subject of our talk today. And Jo is going to tell us much more about some of these subjects. Now, what I'm going to do is to introduce you, first of all, to Jo, just briefly. Jo, welcome. And then I'm going to try and move this forward. I did it. Jo, I'd like to talk to you about 6 aspects of your experience which also relate to today's world. And those topics I mentioned: AI, data, diversity, and inclusion. And we're going to explore them further with our audience of experts and interested people here. So here are the 6 topics I'd like to talk to you about. One is tech, because of your engineering background. 2 is human purpose. Using my fingers, shouldn't I? 2 is the human purpose that you developed, and then you did work on and develop more knowledge and so on. And I'm going to ask you about that. 3 is the corporate aspects of your career and what you learned. 4 is you then switched to being a one-man band and made good music, I hope. So that's the startup there. And in parallel with all of this, you're volunteering. You're volunteering extensively. And your volunteering, I have found this, the theme, the strand, is you're volunteering in things to do with tech ethics, with AI ethics, with humanized AI, and also for humanity. I'm going to ask you about it. Yeah. And then finally, number 6, forgot my count. Number 6, yeah, is that you also are in the BCS, and we're very privileged to have you in the BCS. And being you haven't stopped at one thing. You're co-chair of BCSWomen. You're a member of the Trustee board, and also you're a council member.
Yes.
And in addition to this, Jo also has a family as well. Then just look and gaze in admiration.
The graying happens.
May I introduce you to Jo Stansfield?
Thank you.
I'll try and sink into this chair, which I'm not used to doing. Okay, maybe I will go this along. Let's go into that. What we're aiming to do is to finish this by, we have to be out of here by 8:30. Out of here means gone. So I'm aiming to finish this by about 7:45 to 8 o'clock. Why is it variable? Well, that depends on you. That depends on you. Because of the questions which I hope you're going to put into the chat. My good friend and colleague, David Grundy, is sitting at the back. He'll be recording this session. He will capture the chat. And what he will do is then shout out the questions or feed them to us. And Jo will answer them, or we will have a discussion. Let's see how it goes. Yeah? But that's by 7:45, which gives us just about 1 hour to do that, which, depending on your questions. Good. Let's go for it. Yeah, great. Okay, fine. Joe, I noticed that you got a bachelor's degree in physics, great, which enabled you to switch to engineering. Why was that? Why engineering?
So I studied at Cambridge University.
I love the university.
Yes. Well, I stayed there ever since. I just loved it. I couldn't quite move. So I actually studied natural sciences, and this is where Dalim discovers I only gave him the partial answer in our preparation. So they make you study a range of sciences, and then you narrow in. So by the end of it, I was studying physics. But I started off studying physics, maths, geology, and computer science. They make you do 4, right? It was hard. But well, I mean, as this whole story will tell, you know, the computer science is what's really stuck with me, actually, from all of it. But as I was studying, going through my course, reached the 3rd year when I was mostly specialised in physics by that point, and they gave us a computing topic to do, which was all around simulating galaxies colliding using all of the gravitational equations, and so you could then work out, well, what happens in this situation. And they got us visualizing it, and I managed.
The rest, as they say, is history.
Well, it's because they got us visualizing it, and then that was just like this light bulb moment for me, where I could see, you know, these 2 galaxies moving together in my simulation, and they collide, and then you get these beautiful tails of stars and the spiral shapes and everything forming, and it was just like a light bulb switched on. It's like I suddenly understood how I could combine the computing that I'd been learning with the physics that I'd been learning and simulate things that you can't just test out in the real world. You can't just go and collide some galaxies and see if you get what galaxies look like. But you can simulate that. Absolutely. And you can actually apply that to really important situations in the real world.
Great. So you went into astronomy.
Well, what I did then is I took a 4th year, so I did a master's, and I took all the computing options I could in that. So I'd had the realization at this point, I want to use software to simulate stuff. So I selected a project which was all around simulating optics experiments and kind of applying optics equations to be able to use it as a teaching tool and visualize again what happens for different diffraction patterns and da-da-da-da. And yeah, still loved it. Learned a lot more about software engineering. And at that point, I was looking around for a job. What can I do with all of this combo of physics and with computing? And honestly, this was probably very late to dawn on me. It's like, right, engineering, that is where this is actually extremely useful, because people are building things in the real world that we need to test out before they exist, before they might be real. As they're coming into existence, we need to be able to do safe testing of them. So I started looking around for engineering jobs at that point. I got an intern job at an aerospace and defence company between my 3rd and 4th year, who then got a graduate job with, finished, and worked in a simulation department, which was a little bit like a massive computer game back in the year 2000. So a very early, massively online multiplayer game, except it wasn't massive, and it was all simulations of like physical defense stuff, right? And you could bring in hardware and software together and actually test out what happens and use it in kind of fascinating scenarios to actually use towards the development of all of these different defense and aerospace things. So yeah, loved it. It was a fantastic job and a really interesting kind of entry into what turned into the rest of my career, really.
Amazing. Well, this is all to our benefit, but I can see it was a tightrope in terms of which way you went, and you had lots of possibilities. Yeah. So that's great.
At the time, I didn't really know it, and it's funny that my dad was an engineer, and I didn't really know what an engineer was until I became one and was actually, you know, in the workplace combining my physics and my computing for, you know, kind of practical real applications. Yeah. It was all kind of emergent and slightly serendipitous, I think.
Wow.
Yeah.
Look back through your own lives and see if these multitude of choices, but which one will I take and which one will take me, situations sound familiar. And likewise to people online. And to inspiration for any young people who think, well, you know, it was okay for in the old days, you know, it was all laid out for them. It wasn't. Well, in terms of this, let's talking about yeah, in terms of this, okay. So you went into software engineering and then into product management. So share some highlights, some tips.
Yeah. So after I'd worked in the aerospace firm for a while, I realized that, you know, the way that we were going about software development was really great for these kind of experimental scenarios. But there was loads more to it, actually, and that, you know, to do professional software development to ship products was actually quite a different thing. And I decided my next step was going to be to work in, you know, as a professional software engineer rather than as an engineer who used software to kind of solve their challenges. So I then found what became the next kind of 20 years worth of my career working in software, making industrial application software, essentially. So very much attached to my roots in aerospace. Got a job as a software engineer for what's now Siemens Digital Industries, making software that was CAD and lifecycle management software to essentially help engineering and manufacturing firms organize and manage the development and manufacture and production of these kind of huge scale assets. So yeah, I worked on some really cool things, actually, some projects for you know, features that helped engineers build like enormous scale ships, power plants, all sorts. And as I was, I don't know, I guess developing my software engineering career, probably did that for around about 8 or 9 years, and realized I was getting narrower and narrower focus and, you know, honing my software skills. But what I was losing was some of that bigger picture of the engineering. So I was focused on very, you know, specific features in the software to very pinpoint solutions for, you know, very niche bits of detail. But what I really wanted to be doing was understanding and enabling this kind of amazing feat of engineering that happens, you know, whenever a power plant gets commissioned or a railway line gets built, or, you know, the immense kind of amount of data and coordination and skill and human ingenuity that goes into that. It's amazing. And I was just losing the picture of it a little bit. So that's where I, you know, looked for my next move, and that's where the product management came in, because it gave me the ability to step back a bit from the software and understand those challenges at a higher level and be more of that interface between the engineers and the software teams, so that we were really looking at how do we solve their engineering challenges with software, and not getting so stuck into the details of making each bit happen, but looking at the bigger picture. You know, what is it that they're trying to do, and what can we build that's going to help to address those kind of needs that they have.
Right. Well, in amongst all of that, you mentioned that as a part, I suppose, as a hobby, you were a CAD. What's that?
Oh, a CAD. So computer-aided design. Yeah. So
good.
Yeah. So there's lots of relationship, obviously, between computer-aided design and, you know, building this stuff that the engineers do. So that would be a large part of the software they use, whether it's like 3D physical parts that they'll be designing, or whether it's kind of schematic designs looking at function and fit and all of those kind of things.
It's amazing.
Yeah,
it's still an enormous part of our world, isn't it?
It is. Yeah.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. Number 2, human focus. In terms of human focus, what I'm thinking of is you then did a master's in engineering, organizational psychology.
Yeah, but that way it kind of comes from nowhere a bit, doesn't it? So I'll have to wind back and tell my story again through a whole other lens to make some sense of that. So, I mean, probably as much of many of you can imagine, as a woman working in the intersection between engineering and software, there weren't very many other people like me doing what I was doing. actually calculated that I went for a 15-year stretch in my career when I had no women in my management chain at all. Nowhere from me upwards in the organisation was there. I think for the first 10 years of my career, I only worked with about 20 women. And I was working in big companies here, right? There was a lot of people involved. So, you know, I was kind of aware that I'm doing something that not many other women are doing. And for that first part of my career, I just kind of thought, well, I'm just not like other women. I just like stuff that they're not interested in. It's like, so what, you know, this is just me, I'm a bit different. But then I kind of began to get a bit more curious about it and began to notice, you know, some of the firms I worked, they're not taking me seriously like some of the others. I don't quite get it. Why aren't they kind of appreciating what I'm bringing into this conversation? Then roll forwards a couple more years and I had my children. And then that's when I started to understand and I saw things quite differently. So there's kind of two aspects to this story. The first is living in Cambridge. It is a city full of very terrifyingly intelligent people doing an awful lot of astonishing stuff with engineering and with tech and with science. And I found myself on maternity leave in baby groups, meeting a whole bunch of new friends. Have to say, during my entire pregnancy doing NCT, I related to all of the husbands more than the wives because they were all doing software things. And the fact that we were pregnant women together, it's just like, this is just, yeah, that bit didn't land. But once we actually had our babies and roll forwards maybe 9 months or a year, once I'd managed to get out of the, oh my God, how do I do this parenting thing? And I started to realize that all of my new friends who I was making at baby groups, who were mostly women, were scientists and engineers and technologists, and they were leading companies. And here we were playing with our babies together, and it just struck me as completely absurd that I'd gone through like a good 10, 12 years of my career and I hadn't met any women like this at all. And it took having a baby and going to maternity groups to actually meet any other women with similar interests to me. It's like, this doesn't make any sense. And it completely challenged my assumption that women just don't like this stuff. Because here I was in a room full of women who loved this stuff. They were having successful careers doing this stuff, and they were, you know, happened to come together because we'd had children and nothing to do with our professional connections. Which is, it's like there's something a bit off here. Okay, maybe, you know, it's not just me, and, you know, they're clearly, you know, super intelligent, smart women. It's like, where are we all at work? So I had that realization, and then I went back to work, got back after maternity leave, and let's just say it was quite challenging. I went back part-time. I decided to work 4 days a week while my son was tiny. And they decided back at that time, if you weren't in the office full-time, you didn't get a full-time desk. You had to sit on a hot desk. But there weren't any hot desks near my team, so I had to sit downstairs and everyone else was upstairs. Like, what, really? So then we managed to figure out, well, I can go upstairs, but I have to sit in a desk where someone's on holiday and I can move this every day. And I had to move my entire setup. And it took an entire month before someone actually found me a proper desk. So this seems a bit wrong. You know, this is a bit of an issue going on here. But then I started to realize that people were making all kinds of assumptions about me, that I didn't want to be progressing at work anymore, that I was now all focused on my kids. And, you know, this previous kind of career where I was aiming to be, you know, kind of product manager and do strategic kind of direction setting and all of this. Like, people were kind of quietly shuffling me out of the way because they thought, that's not her interest anymore. It's like, well, it is. Nothing's changed. I still want to do that. And then the moment that I suddenly had another spark of understanding was there was a fairly junior software engineer in the organization who had managed to organize a hackathon, and it was the first hackathon the company had had. And it was like brilliant. They had managed to get it onto the agenda, and everyone was really excited about it and like thought, great, you know, we've all got a chance to do something really innovative and just like put our kind of imaginations to the test. But I was working 4 days a week and it was running on 3 days, one of them that I wasn't working. So I went to him and said, well, I'm only actually in for 2 of the days. Can I still take part? And he said, oh, I'm not sure about that. I'm going to give the option to all the full-time people first, and I'll come back to you and I'll let you know. So it's like, okay, so part-time people can't be innovative now. And he did come back to me the day before it started and said, there's a space, you can do it. By which time it wasn't possible because I didn't have childcare. So there was no option for me to join. But I think coming back from leave, I had a kind of a detachment from it in a way that I feel quite relieved about now in retrospect, because I didn't really take any of it all that personally. And I could see that this chap had done a really brilliant thing by getting the hackathon to happen at all. But he'd wandered into a situation that he just didn't understand, because there weren't other people like me that were working part-time, and there wasn't other people that needed to shuffle hours around. And so that's when it started to show like all of these systemic things that are just built into the assumptions about how people work, that makes it a bit harder for people who aren't quite matching those expectations to really get properly engaged and to have the same opportunities and to progress. So, I mean, this is a very long-winded answer. I'm afraid you've got my other life story in this.
That's fine. I mean, women in the audience and online, do any of these things resonate with you too? Yeah? We'd like to hear. Write something down in the chat, send them to us if you're online, or we'll hear more from people in the audience later.
Yeah.
But yes, this sounds like the alternative history of computing.
Yeah. So I decided I was going to do something about it. And our company had like this annual gathering of the executive team where they would essentially come and answer all the employees' questions, and you could ask them about the strategy and what's next. And so I decided, right, I'm going to ask them about women in technology and what's our strategy, because I can see we've not got very many of them. And along came this meeting. I was all poised, ready to answer my question. It was a room probably about this size, filled with like 50, 60 people. I looked around the room. Everybody else in the room, bar about 3 people, was a man. And the other 3 people were all executive assistants. I thought, oh God, nobody else even cares about this. And I totally chickened out of asking the question. But then I had major regret, and I went back to my desk and I emailed the CTO, which was quite terrifying at the time, because it was probably a 1,500 people organization. It wasn't somebody who I knew and chatted to. So I asked the question by email. And kind of to my astonishment, he answered really quickly and said, actually, I care about this too. Will you come and meet with me? And at that point, we then formed a plan that we're going to do some data analysis. We're going to understand what the organization looks like from a gender perspective. And that then started highlighting that some of those challenges that I was having, you could see them in the data in the system, that women weren't progressing so far. They were leaving more quickly. And you could start to actually explore some of the things, the way the organization looked in a more systemic way. So roll forwards a few years, I did this kind of as a voluntary extra job. And it began dawning on me over time, actually, just the weight of responsibility there is when you're dealing with topics like people's identity and people's opportunities, that you really need to be responsible in how you do this. So your original question was about the organisational psychology masters, and it was kind of over time, as I was progressing into more leadership roles and kind of understanding leadership responsibility as well, that it really dawned on me, I need to do this properly if I'm going to do this. I want to understand it in much more detail, and I want to make sure what I'm doing is well informed, that I'm not just following internet trends or whatever, and that we've got a good basis to what we're doing. So that's when I signed up for the organisational psychology master's degree, to get into much more depth understanding of it.
Interesting. Well, this is not a serious question. But could it have been that you stumbled across the jealousy buried in a whole load of men who couldn't take 9 months or 6 months off because they couldn't have babies? Sorry, let's pass on to the next.
I think there was a more serious point in there that I did actually. I mean, I related to it very much as becoming a parent rather than becoming a mother, the first case as well. And I had loads of really interesting conversations with the men that I worked with. Actually, quite a few of who did want to take leave, but didn't feel they were in a position that they could do, because they were the main earner. Actually, so was I, but there's less choice as a woman, and they didn't feel like they could take the time out to actually take paternity leave, or, you know, to have some of those responsibilities. So, I mean, I think these gendered issues do actually affect all of them. We've all got challenges related to that.
Yeah. Well, we still have challenges, but thank goodness that things are moving on, or at least I hope you'll agree they're moving on. Okay, let's us move on as well, because I think this is covered part of our point 3, which is you were in the corporate world as the director of people, data, and insights. And my questions were, why did you choose this? What were the highlights and any tips from that?
Yeah,
You partly covered that already.
I did, but I can tell you a bit more of the story to join the gaps a bit. So up until the point of starting my master's, I was still in my engineering role. And actually I got to the point where I was leading a department of about 60 engineers. So, you know, made progress I was really proud of. And actually, especially considering that I was working part-time, I still managed to take on, you know, kind of responsibility, and I had teams around the world, which was just absolutely fantastic and amazing. So taking on the master's degree, let's say, was like one thing too many. It all sounds like a bit too much, and it really was. So at that point, I realized I need to simplify what I'm doing. I can't be, you know, leading an engineering department and having my kids and doing this master's degree and trying to do all the voluntary kind of diversity stuff on the side. It was a ridiculous amount of stuff that I'd taken on. It's like I wanted to solve all of the problems I could see all at once, you know, in one go. So I reflected really hard, to be honest. It was a very hard decision, but I decided at that point, I think I can make the most difference in tech and engineering, actually looking at more of those systemic things about how people work together and diversity and inclusion in those fields, rather than in my specific engineering role with it. So I did, right, I'm going to see, can I get a role where I am focused on the diversity and inclusion, so it's much more aligned with a master's degree, and I'm trying to split myself in so many directions. So I went to someone in my HR team, the HR director who I'd been working with, who had been doing the data analysis voluntarily with, and said, I'd really like to make this my full job. I'm doing too much. Can you help me find some work doing it? And then a few weeks later, she came back and said, Jo, we're going to create a role in HR. And we'd like to, we'd like you to, stand for the role and put yourself forward for it, which of course I did. So I was the first person in the organisation to have a role focused on diversity and inclusion, but then that quite quickly progressed. Thank you. I think obviously, given my kind of tech and data background, I bring a very tech and data point of view onto diversity and inclusion.
And you commanded a lot of respect because of that.
Yeah, so then that translated into this people, data and insights role,
right,
where I was more broad by that point than diversity and inclusion. So I was also looking at kind of retention and kind of succession planning and all of the other things that HR worry about, making the organisation operate properly, making sure that we've got good data around those things, good data governance around those things. But the thing that I've brought forwards into what I do now, and I'll talk more about that in a bit, is around the diversity and inclusion with it, because actually that data is so immensely powerful. And I started off with the data about gender, but of course gender is just a tiny, tiny piece of what is really happening, right? It's not only women who feel excluded in tech careers. There's a much broader challenge, for people from different ethnicities, for people with disability, neurodiversity. There's so much more to think about. What I realized is that once you can have data about people's representation and about their equity of opportunities, their progression, how much they stay in the organization, and about their experience through things like survey questions about their engagement and so on, actually you just get this very rich picture how different communities experience the same organization in very different ways. So a lot of the work I was doing was around trying to uncover some of those things, and so we could then be much more targeted in support people at work.
Amazing. So is that when you invented AI? And people in the audience, please wait till the end of this session before you send your CVs to go and ask for her consultative help. Okay, that's really interesting. Right, so you sampled, more than sampled, the corporate world.
I did.
And you liked it so much that you decided to set up your own company.
Yeah, sort of. Yeah, so
How did that work?
yeah, so back on this sort of parallel story about all the background stuff to my work. So I'd signed up to take my master's degree. I'd got my job doing people data in the people team. And then my master's degree finished. And I had all of this time available to myself. So I'd been taking the master's degree half time. And you know, when I completed it, I'd been doing my research around gender and race in tech teams and really uncovered some things I thought were really important. Like, well, I want to put this to use, not just in this organization, but I want to help our industry and help to, you know, do more with more organizations. So I thought, well, I've asked the big, bold, stupid question that no one would say yes to before, and they agreed to it. So I'll try again. I went to my HR director again and said, I've got half of my time free now that I never had before. And what I'd really like to do is set up consultancy on the side of my current work and do those things together. And they went away and thought about it for a little bit. And a couple of weeks later, they came back and said, yes, okay, you can do that. Here's some terms and conditions and things that we'd like you to agree with, like, you know, don't compete with us. And off you go. So at that point, I set up Inclusioneering alongside having my corporate job. And I was able to do both of those for a good few years alongside each other.
Amazing. Well done. This all takes a whole lot of initiative, of course, and also nerve and so on. So yeah, fantastic. Yeah. Okay, so that's great. So inclusioneering, you described it as an expert consultancy in inclusive innovation.
Yes.
Sounds great. What does it mean?
Yeah, no, I always have to describe it. So I see this in three parts, and it's like the techie cut on what diversity and inclusion looks like as a silly way to describe it, maybe. So the first part is all around what I was talking about with that people, data, and insights role. So actually using data and evidence to really understand where an organization is, so you can pinpoint opportunities and start to build some strategy. How do we actually build a program around this? And then that will include all of the things like the data governance and the governance around actually assigning responsibilities to doing those things. So that's a very corporate bit. HR teams, you know, often don't have those kind of skills in-house, and so it can be really helpful to support them with that. So the next bit is around the inclusion and innovation teams. And that kind of plays back more on my own experience of what it was like to be someone who was a bit different in a tech team, right? So going through kind of the innovation process. And then also taps into the research that I did in my master's degree. So that was all around gender and race in tech teams, and some of those everyday barriers that essentially get put in people's way that stop them from making so much progression and impact as they could do in their work. So that kind of comes down to some of the assumptions that maybe get made about people, some of the ways that they, let me just explain more specifically. So the findings, particularly for women, were in tech teams, and this is probably a surprise to literally none of you. In tech teams, women do less technical tasks than the men do. This can happen for two reasons. One can be the team dynamics kind of pushes them towards a more stereotyped feminist role. It certainly happened to me a few times, which is immensely frustrating.
Yes.
Business starting new jobs, wanting to work on like the algorithmic stuff, and they're saying, "Oh, can you fix this user interface?" Speechless. Like, no, that's not what I'm here for.
Thank goodness you said that. I
Yeah.
thought you were going to say, "Oh, Joe, we're running out of coffee."
No, but this can be the tech equivalent, right? And so women get put into roles that they're not necessarily aspiring to. Because they're more stereotypically kind of aligned to what you expect of women. Of course, some women do want to do user interface jobs, right? And there's nothing wrong with doing user interface jobs. And project management is the other route that women will often get pushed into.
And business analysts.
And business analysts. Well, I've done that. But part of the consequences of this and what my research showed was I asked people about how highly valued the work they did was as well, or what was the status of their work as compared to what other people in the team did. And what that showed was a really strong correlation that technical teams believe the most technical work is the most important work. So then that's an immediate barrier and a problem for people who aren't doing the most technical work. And it also has no resemblance on what's actually valuable to the customers and the end result of what's being built as well. So that's one whole set of dynamics that, you know, is ripe to be disrupted to help people actually get more equitable opportunities and more equitable recognition for the good work that they're actually doing in teams. So the other angle of the research that I found was all around race and ethnicity. And what that showed was that there wasn't so much difference in the work that people were assigned, but where there was difference was in people's job satisfaction and their career aspirations. What it showed was that people from ethnic minorities were much less satisfied in their tech roles than white people. And looking at the answers to questions, you know, there's a whole kind of set of questions that actually fed into that, was that people were feeling less empowered, less able to bring their own methods of doing the work into their teams. And especially given that tech teams are largely following agile processes, you know, it's about empowering the team and giving them the tools to solve the challenges that are given to them. This is really worrying. It's like, why are people within our tech teams not having that equal experience of being empowered to do the work their way? So a whole nother set of dynamics there to start to examine and disrupt in our teams. So anyway, those are the kind of things I can help organizations and teams look at, like within their, you know, their daily practices. You know, what do we do and how are we actually including people, and are we getting the best that we can from everybody? I think there's more that people can be giving, and you know, we can actually help people to bring that into the work.
Absolutely. This enabling function sounds vital to encourage and optimize people. Yeah. Okay. So you soon found that this wasn't enough to occupy your time. So in parallel, I'm joking. So in parallel with this, you decided on volunteering, but you're doing this throughout. And the strap lines I put down were tech ethics, AI ethics, humanized AI, and ForHumanity.
Yes.
Now, take those in whichever way you like. But my question that will come out of that is, what is humanized AI?
Yeah, it's an interesting one to dive straight into. So
No, by
let me
all
give a
means,
bit of
let's go through the
background
others.
and intro to it, if that's all right.
Absolutely.
So the final piece of the picture that I didn't describe for inclusioneering is around helping firms with AI ethics and helping to uncover some of those ethical challenges that might happen from their use of AI, you know, particularly when it relates to HR teams or AI that's making decisions about people. I get especially worried about software, actually like recruitment software or kind of skills matching software and stuff like this, that's essentially suggesting to HR managers and recruiters who you should hire and who you should promote. And this kind of gets a little bit worrying because they might trust it and just do what it says.
Easiest route.
It's the easiest route. And I think that people who are less technical have more of this tendency towards automation bias than people who are. So particularly when we're using AI in situations where it's making decisions about people, we need to think really carefully about, well, we might trust it, but is it actually trustworthy? And I think this is where the humanized AI concept is really interesting, because AI is seeming more and more human. So the way that we talk about AI, ChatGPT having hallucinations, I mean, you just talk to it. I mean, we interact with it like it's a human, but of course there isn't actually a person behind it thinking and understanding and responding. It's simply putting together words and concepts in ways that essentially follow patterns that it's learned from. So humanized AI, I think, is interesting on those two angles. You know, one is our tendency to humanize it, when it isn't actually human or not human-like yet. Perhaps we get further along that line, we'll see.
Yeah.
And then the other, the other angle on it is, how do we make sure that it is actually humanized and that we are making decisions in a human way, making good use of the tools that are there.
Yeah.
So I think there's those two different forms of humanized AI, both very interesting to explore.
Well, I can certainly relate to that, because here we are talking about making our businesses more optimal and, and so on, for the purposes that they were intended, doing that through people, and now doing that without people. So how do we match the two? So humanized AI for me is very much to do with the things that you've been describing, ethics, and also the let me say, not the artificial intelligence, but the applying human intelligence to the processes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, and there'll be a lot more of that to come, I'm sure. Okay, so we mentioned ForHumanity.
Yes.
What's ForHumanity?
So ForHumanity is an AI ethics charity that builds independent audit of AI systems. So ForHumanity looks at essentially exposing the risks around AI systems and putting in place mitigations to make sure that those are properly identified and managed. So it does this by means of independent audit. So it builds audit criteria for different AI systems. Largely, it's doing it by following different legal frameworks. And so there's an EU AI Act audit that's being developed at the moment, which is being designed to be compatible with the NIST risk management framework for AI. And essentially, it's trying to turn complex law that's not very easy to read into binary criteria. So you can go down a list and you can check, right, do we actually meet this criteria and what's the evidence for it? So it's a tool for organizations to be able to bring themselves up to compliance with the law when that is going to be coming into effect next year. And I guess also to stretch themselves to think further about it as well. So ForHumanity is quite, I guess, forward thinking in terms of where it's looking at. So there's lots of knowledge base articles around risk management and around AI ethics and around what I worked on about biometric data and the risk of biometric data, for example. So helping organizations to really identify where their risks are, what governance they can put in place, how they can manage their systems, both developing systems and deploying systems to make sure that they're working for the benefit of humanity. That's its name.
Yeah. Well, that sounds very worthwhile. And I know of at least one organization which aims to work for the benefit of humanity, or as we put it, making IT good for society. So tell me about BCS, because finding yourself with yet another spare 3% of your time available, you do a whole load of things for the BCS. For example, you're co-chair of BCSWomen, a specialist group which I believe specializes in I don't know, but
what is it?
You're also a member of the council, BCS Council, and of the Trustee board. The obvious thought that occurs to me is how, but never mind, we'll skip that. What do you do in these voluntary groups?
Yeah, so for BCSWomen, I'm co-chair running the Women's Inspiration Series as an example.
And I should say, you have run a whole series of Women's Inspiration events for us this year, where the strapline is inspiring women with inspiration for everyone. And you've provided inspiration for lots of people, you with your interviewees and so on. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, pleasure. It's been a lovely series. But we do things beyond events as well. So, for example, we are involved in the City of London Corporation has a task force all around women pivoting to digital careers. So we've got some volunteers within BCSWomen who are essentially taking part in this task force, helping with some of the research and some of the actions that are going to be stemming from that to help attract more women to retrain in later careers to then enter a digital career. We also have got lots of women who go off and do lots of different speaking events and volunteering, but others have written books. There's lots of different ways that BCSWomen are trying to help. Yeah, indeed. Yeah, trying to help the IT.
Example one. Yeah, right.
So that's BCSWomen.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Okay, now some more generic questions, and I'll come back to you and ask you for your input on this as well. How can BCS make IT good for society? What do you think it does?
I think it does, yeah. So as a member of the Trustee board, part of our responsibility is around the strategic direction for BCS and helping the executive team, I guess, with the governance and accountability for the direction that we're taking. And I'm very supportive, actually, of what the BCS are doing, but I would love to see us doing more of it and making more impact with it. I think that, as you can probably tell from the theme of the charities that I support, right, it's all about making technology work for people and actually enhancing society as a result of the existence of technology. I would love to see BCS grow its member base, have more professional members, and actually I'm really supportive of Alistair Ravel's presidential theme of chartership. So I'm not yet chartered as anything, but that's on my plan, because I think that, especially in light of things like the Post Office Horizon scandal, actually that professionalism and the ethics, for individuals, but also for organisations, is becoming increasingly apparent just how much that matters. And especially as IT is embedded in everything.
You get applause from the next room.
CrowdStrike, yeah, and CrowdStrike. The potential for IT, but there's also huge. We've really got to take that seriously, and upholding and setting the standards of professionalism is really important. Absolutely,
and there's increasing realization that the risk around IT is getting even huger.
Yeah. Definitely huger.
Okay, so I find this all a little bit hard to believe, because BCS has got 70,000 members now, increasing focus on corporate membership, lapping its way through 500,000 to 3 million people in the UK who work in IT. So, what's the problem? And there obviously are very major challenges and a need to convince people from government level downwards in these things. Yeah, Joe, well done for flying the flag for that. Okay, well, at that point, I'm going to pause and ask you for questions, because we've got 15 minutes, 20 minutes for questions to Joe on any of these themes. And likewise, if you are online and you want to submit questions, please do so via the chat, and we'll try and pick those up too. Any questions in the room, first of all?
I'm interested to find out what encouraged you to do an MSc course in organizational psychology.
Yeah.
After industrial experience where you were doing software simulation and writing.
Yeah, quite a change, right? Well, it was two strands. I sort of mentioned both of them a little bit. One was as I was getting more leadership responsibility in the work I was doing and having a bigger understanding, I guess, of some of the organizational dynamics and the role that I had to play in that as a leader. And the other strand was all about the diversity and inclusion, and really wanting to make sure that I understood well, some of the psychological foundations of that. So when we're starting to try and make some changes, that's done from the place of best knowledge and evidence. So organisational psychology, I'm sure, sounds very mysterious to most of you, and it's not something that you kind of have much overlap with in your work. So to explain it a little bit more fully, I'd actually, I mean, my life sounds bonkers when I explain it in one go. I'd actually studied some psychology. I actually studied some psychology in my spare time, just for fun, in my 20s, because I think it was as I was a software engineer, actually, I was kind of beginning to realize, the different styles people had of coding software, and, kind of sort of interested in, things like, what's it, Conway's law, about how software patterns follow the organization architecture and things like that, and how you can kind of change your software outcomes by changing your team shapes and things like this. So I'd been studying some psychology in my spare time, and actually realized that there's lots in psychology that's very relevant in how organizations work, in how we treat each other in terms of bias and potential for stereotyping and things like that. So yeah, with that background, and then realizing, well, I want to lead, I want to make changes, and actually I'm dealing with topics that are really close to people's identities. Actually, both of those things are supported by knowing more about psychology. So organizational psychology is really psychology applied in the context of businesses and other organizations. So it's kind of like an extension of social psychology, like the group dynamics of how people interact, and some of those attitudes, and conflict and leadership and all of these kind of topics come into it.
Let me just say, yeah, we very much believe in that. Well, for example, we had a fascinating session once, focused on 4 colors, red and blue and yellow and
green. Is that the color insights personality?
That was it. Kitty.
John, I have 2 questions. Okay. I may ask. The first is there's a big elephant in the room about job loss in even in the tech sector. I would like to ask your insight about what kind of support and training to kind of instill the people in their job is automated by AI. And my second question is, what kind of initiative, support and training and exercises that we can ensure organizations identify the maximum potential of people from neurodiversity, from ethnic minority, gender, what have you? I mean, these two areas keeps me awake at night.
It's on the job losses one. I can't remember who said it, but there was a quote. AI is not going to take your job. Someone who knows how to use AI better than you will. And I think that there's some likely to be some truth to that. Actually, AI is there as a tool to help us, but much like in my AI and HR scenario, you really don't want to leave the AI to do it all by itself. It's there to help people be more productive and more efficient. Left alone to do its own thing, that's not a great scenario for anybody, actually. It doesn't necessarily give the outcomes that we want from it. So actually learning how to make good use of their AI tools that are in your sphere, I think, is a very productive way to go, so that you can actually make yourself more efficient by being able to use the tools really well. I mean, maybe a silly example of it, but my husband makes games for a living. He got really into this game that someone had put online recently, and it's a game designer who combines the real world with the digital world. And it was kind of fascinating, actually, because what he'd done was to put this kind of chalice that was made of gold with some obvious code written around it in the woods somewhere in America. And he'd set a challenge of, you need to find this within 20 days. Whoever finds it wins the chalice, which is worth $20,000, and they'll win all of the prize funds, which is now going to be in Bitcoin from people that sign up to it. Which was, I mean, it kind of alarms me a little bit, kind of beside way on the story. It's like, this is asking for trouble. But anyway, he ran this challenge, and there was obviously like some interesting symbols and code in all of the photos shared around this thing. Like, my husband is an expert programmer. He's made computer games for 25 years. He knows exactly what he's doing. But he didn't know how to crack this code. So he asked ChatGPT, write him a Visual Basic script or you know, whatever in Excel, so that he could start to decode all of these symbols to actually work out what they said. And it was amazing. You know, like 2 minutes later, he had some code that he could run, and he could start trying to interrogate exactly what was, you know, written on this chalice that people could win. I have to say, he didn't find the answer to it, but I think this is a brilliant example of how AI can help people who are already very expert. You know, he knew exactly what to ask it to actually get it to write some decent code that ran, and had a pretty decent shot at decoding this mystery thing on the cup. In the end, by the way, the person who found it, they were posting daily videos online showing like this cup, and you could see, you know, the leaves changing colours and the different weather patterns and stuff. The person who actually found the cup was a meteorologist, and he'd managed to narrow it down by geeking out over weather patterns all over the States. Figured out exactly where it was based on when it was sunny and when it got dark. So yeah, the code breaking didn't work, but I think that was an interesting example actually of how people who are very skilled can put AI to very good use to actually make themselves much more efficient and solve challenges beyond what they would normally have managed to solve.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Just a small mute point for Dalim in a question. You referred to a one-man band in your introduction. Yes. In the interest of inclusivity, and there was I'm wondering where the one-man band is, but I'm sure that's not the case. Yeah. And the question. And the question really, given your experience and journey so far, for women, say in the postgraduate space, and there are many women who are quite clever, intellectually quite capable, who may have went to in the STEM field.
Yeah.
What would your advice be to them in terms of how they orient their career and life?
Yeah. I guess it depends on their own specific situation. I mean, one of the first things I say is stick to your guns. You know, people are probably going to have this group dynamic that pulls them towards something that's maybe not what they wanted to do for themselves. So just first up, advocate for yourself. Like, if you want to be working on the database and you're being pulled onto user experience, say no, resist it, and put yourself on the path that you want to be on and make it clear to people what it is. And one of the things I've really learned in my own kind of career path is actually, once you can visualize what you want and ask for it, it's extremely powerful. I mean, it's like my 2 big ridiculous questions actually worked because I knew what I wanted to do. I didn't know if they'd say yes to it, but I had a good concept of where I wanted to be. And actually getting clear with that and asking for it is what made all of the difference and made it possible.
Try to decide and then go for it.
Yeah. And that can emerge. You know, it doesn't need to be all there in one go.
I'm interested in hearing from the other ladies in the room, if you'd like to either yeah.
I was going to ask a question, but the chat was going to. So, like you, I was the only woman in a team of I think there's 2 women in a team of about 114 when I joined. But luckily, I was given a piece of work. I wasn't just told to shadow somebody. My question is, if you were a project manager and say you had a new team and you were trying to divvy out the work, I too experienced that gender bias, that women aren't seen as techie as their male counterparts. And say in that example that they used an AI tool to help with the skills profile of those people to divvy it out fairly, can you see a point where AI would be less biased than the person doing the work because of their cultural or, you know, background to say, well, I'll give it to this group because I know, you know, does that make sense?
It does make sense.
Yeah,
Although I suspect random assignment might be less biased than an AI at the moment.
Possibly, yeah. So the question is, would AI be less biased in those kind of scenarios of picking the work for different individuals of a team?
At the moment, it wouldn't be. AI essentially learns from the patterns of the past, and you know, there's been lots of cases over the last decade or so, really, where AI making decisions about people has been shown to just kind of reproduce existing biases. So I think Amazon were one of the first firms that brought in AI in recruitment tools, like in 2016 or something, ages ago, but they had to scrap it because it kept on putting forwards men rather than women for roles. And it turns out, it learned from the facts that Amazon has got more men than women, so men are more fitting of the profile. And when AI isn't really transparent and we can't tell how it makes its decisions, these things can emerge really easily.
I guess in that scenario though, if you gain this skill set or their history of the people without their names, so you couldn't tell what gender or even ethnicity they were from, you just said, here's the skill set all the individuals work out what would be ideal for this particular part of the project. So the less you don't feed it that intelligence, maybe the less biased it would be.
You try, but data's very telling. Unfortunately, there's always these things hiding in sort of proxy variables, and you think you've removed everything, but actually you haven't, because there's patterns that will show up that will tell it your ethnicity or your gender, even if you take those things off.
Hobby, girl guy.
Yeah. Yeah, that one.
9 months,
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Ladies here, any other comments? Lady at the back.
Yeah, we've got a question from Nikki.
Yes.
Asked,
Lovely lady.
has there been someone in your
Have
career
a look at that.
who've been different to you? I've been fortunate to have several people who were incredibly supportive and helpful. Now I strive to be that person for others. What's your perspective on the importance of mentorship and support for shaping a career?
Yeah, lovely question. Yeah, there have been some people that have been really significant in my career. Very first one was the boss I had in the aerospace firm I described, a man called Rob Smith, and he believed in me way more than I believed in me. And he actually gave me so much responsibility that I didn't realize I was ready for. And I was quite terrified by it at the time. It's like he gave me a project to lead for an MOD client. It's like, well, I'm a graduate. This is terrifying. I can't do this. But he put me in that position, and I did it, and it worked, and it went well. And that was really empowering, actually. And that taught me a lot about, actually, I can do these things. So having his belief and actually kind of pushing me into that really made a difference. Then kind of roll forwards several years to the story with the CTO, another man called Dave Wielded, who actually was the person who introduced me to the BCS as well. And he mentored me for a while, as well as setting me on this project to analyze the data. And he asked me some insightful questions, I think, that just helped to open up my imagination of what I wanted to be doing and how I could go about doing it. That was really helpful. So he was another mentor that was to me. I guess others, my dad as well. He's somebody who I've always really admired and looked up to in terms of the way that he he's carried out his career and achieved a lot. He's a very quiet, introverted person, but he was a leader as well. And that really spoke to me, because I don't feel like somebody who's like a massive extrovert. I want to lead things, and actually seeing somebody so close up who could lead in an introverted way was just really lovely, actually, to understand some different ways to do it. So I realized they're all men, and I think that that's great, actually. And I think it's an important point that we don't only need to have role models who are our own gender or our own demographic. But all of that said, I did actually also then, at one point in my career, going on a women's leadership development program, which was really eye-opening. I was still at that point in my career where I hadn't really kind of sussed out that this was a factor in things. And so I was quite curious about, well, what's it going to be like being in a group that's all women when I'm used to being in a group that's mostly men? But there was a woman from my organisation who was on the same programme as me, who was in a very senior position. And actually it was really eye-opening to see how more senior women leaders conducted themselves and how they made decisions and how they presented what they were doing. And I found that I could put myself in their shoes actually much more easily than I could do into most of my male colleagues' shoes. And so, whilst I've had some brilliant male mentors, actually finding somebody who I could relate to in a different way, as another woman, was really amazing. And I spent probably about the next 10 years and still do an over I tell her, just saying how amazing she is, and you know, just how yeah, how much I appreciate the approach that she takes, that I'm able to kind of learn from the way that she does things.
Good, that's really good. David, do you have any other questions online?
No.
Okay. Gentlemen.
It's quite a simple question. You mentioned Excel and CAD-CAM.
Yeah.
It's been favourites maybe,
Yeah.
but what other programs would you recommend one should have under your elbow?
That's a very general question. What in any particular field you're interested for, like?
Well, with the future in view,
Yeah.
what coming up, you would know more. You know, to look out for.
Well, I mean, I think it's
going to
very,
fly.
very discipline specific, really. But I mean, I think keeping abreast with AI developments is obviously a very useful thing right now.
Is that a program, AI?
Well, no, obviously that's many programs, but I mean, ChatGPT is
Technology.
so, yeah.
Check out our last 30 events. Yeah.
Only go on the internet.
Large number of us.
Thank you.
Okay, lady at the back.
Oh, yes. I don't have a question, but I have a comment. I think what you said is giving me a lot of hope, and I'm very thankful for you being here and this presentation about women in the workplace and the corporate world. It's really inspiring. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you.
There was one here.
Yeah, I was just wondering, from your expert view, from the perspective of society as a whole, what you saw as the biggest single opportunity and the biggest single threat from AI?
Oh boy, that's a rather mind-blowingly big question.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure where to start with that. I mean, I think that AI opens up, you know, possibilities of scale that we just can't achieve by not having AI. So being able to, I mean, like AlphaFold, I think is a great example of the single team lines that has just transformed what, protein structures, right? So it used to would have been sort of a year's worth of a PhD student to come up with one. It's now created kind of information about thousands and thousands and thousands of protein structures. So actually just being able to unlock that scale of exploration, I think is going to be extremely powerful. So in the industrial world, lots of the work I've done has been with firms and kind of academic industry collaborations that are looking about sustainability in the industrial world and how to decarbonize industry. And I think that there's kind of similar leaps that I'm hoping will be made in those regards. So being able to discover new materials, new material processes that essentially remove a lot of the carbon emissions from those type of processes. So I think that's a line that I'm very excited by. So as an example, just to put this a bit of a scale on why that matters, the global cement industry is responsible for 8% of all of the world's CO2 emissions. 8% of all of it is down to one industry. So if we can change the way that cement is manufactured, actually we can make enormous global scale change. And I think that AI is going to make a huge difference in fields like that.
Threats?
Threats, I think people trust it too much. I think that there's the biggest thing that I worry about is it's just left to do its own thing without any oversight, and it doesn't, it can cause more harm than good. It will make poor decisions, cause all kinds of problems.
And of course, the huge amount of energy that's required.
It is, yeah.
For AI models.
It is.
Thank you.
Okay. Did you have a question? No. Okay. David, any others?
No, but we're ready.
Francis?
Oh yeah, a question about AI again. But you think soon AI will progress to a stage which they can explain why they make their decisions? Because you mentioned just now, the lack of transparency.
Yeah.
do you see, we know that at the moment, the public data set, available for AI to evolve is, I won't be exhausted, but it's getting not as plentiful as it used to be.
Yeah.
Do you think AI will evolve towards making itself more transparent? Do you see any, possibility of that, or it just will remain like a black box,
Yeah, I
garbage
think
in, garbage out?
there's a huge need for it, and it's being more recognised that that is a need, which is all good. And from what I understand, academics are looking at how to develop explainable AI. I'm afraid I know nothing at all about where they've got to with it. I think there's some promising lines of inquiry, but we're not there yet. Let's hope so. It's,
There must be some
very
reasoning. There must be some reasoning inside, and then to develop the algorithm to explain why you come up with this decision or output.
It's a bit like you're taking a maths exam, providing your workings, you don't just come out the figure and go, well, how did you get to it? But I think what I've heard from AI scientists looking into this, it's about predicting what the potential outcome might be. As we predicted, the AI tool might come out with that as an outcome. And while they can predict it, it's okay. So when they can't fathom out how it got to that, then you're talking about emergence. That's when it starts to get scary, because they have no clue how it got to that problem, or how, like I say, even to get it to explain itself. So
I think putting it back into human terms is really important as well. So you might be able to explain it in algorithmic terms, but like using the skills example, one tool that I've seen is Workday, and they've got a kind of a skills cloud, and you can essentially go shopping for people that have got the right skills for roles that are open. And I will be 100% frank that this really worries me, because they present it a bit like an online shopping list, right? It's a bit like you're going to Sainsbury's and you're picking apples and bananas, and it recommends you, why don't you look at this one, and this one? But you don't know what is at number 20 in the list showing you. It can't tell you in any human terms why blogs is at number 20. I think that there's more sort of human dimensions when it's as well to get developed.
So you mentioned several times about the human KPI or connected. Yeah. I'm very worried that when we have the robots running around the street, how do we control their? How do we overlook decision oversight? Yeah, decision look to basically tell the robot, no, it's wrong. You have to do this. I don't expect you have an answer, but just want to share with you this my concern.
Yeah, no, I don't have an answer, but it's a fascinating problem, isn't it? That as we go more towards AGI, the general intelligence, actually the oversight of that gets harder and harder.
Yeah, especially physical tasks. Especially physical tasks, the human oversight decision loop. How are we going to mitigate?
An excellent question.
Perhaps this is where increased academic focus on AI, and just to throw that in, the BCS have developed certification in AI and ethics, which in itself needs a lot of refinement, but it's a start, and that's what we must do, put governance structures in place so that we can more better judge whether what is good and what is bad. But Joe, we're at the end of the session now, but I must ask you, do you have any closing messages or guidance for our audience here or online?
I would possibly just similar to an answer I gave to someone's question. I can't remember whose question it was now, around advice for women working in tech. Actually, work on that vision you have of where you want to be and ask for it. It's far more powerful than you might imagine. That's what unlocks things for me.
That's great. And I'm going to steal that. I think that applies to everybody.
I think it does.
Yeah. So yeah, take heed. That's fantastic. Joe Stansfield, thank you very much for your insight. Yeah. I know you're all really keen to go and write that program for AI for treasure hunting. But before you go, just want to tell you that in terms of our branches, we've got an AGM coming. We have 3 branches, therefore 3 AGMs. The first of them is the London South AGM, which is tomorrow, and that's accompanied by an event as well. So that's tomorrow if you're interested, and it's all online. Then later on, relating to what we're talking about today, he's going to give us what I've titled an AI tech talk about LLMs, the good and the bad, the ugly, I don't know. But that's going to be on December the 12th. So we have various things like that. Of course, there are programs running in about 90 other BCS groups as well. Check them out, make the most of learning and nothing else and all the rest of it. Joe, I want to ask you, is there anything for BCS Women coming up that you want to tell us about?
I'll have to look up the dates, but there is an event with Nicola Martin, who's absolutely phenomenal. Remember her surname, and Wendy. Yeah, so they're talking about cybersecurity. So, yeah, should be a good one.
Great. So look out for those. And meanwhile, if you go next door, you'll be able to look out for some food and drink for yourselves. So thank you. Thank you.